August Strindberg's The Red Room was a scandal when it landed in 1879 Stockholm, a vicious portrait of the city's failed artists, corrupt institutions, and the machinery that grinds idealistic men into dust. This is Haberdash Books, where we resurrect the forgotten masterpieces that shaped literature itself. Strindberg wrote this novel in a fever of rage against every force that had rejected him, and it became one of the most dangerous books in Scandinavian history, banned, attacked, and deliberately buried by the literary establishment. Subscribe and email hello@haberdashbooks.com to claim one full audiobook from our public domain catalogue. MP3 download, yours to keep, plus the EPUB when available. Hit subscribe and YouTube will bring you a new forgotten classic every single day. August Strindberg began as Scandinavia's most celebrated playwright. By the 1870s, his work commanded packed theatres across Europe. Major newspapers serialized his writing. He was translated into German, French, and English before his 30th birthday. He was the man Ibsen's admirers watched with genuine fear. Then he wrote The Red Room, a savage, semi-autobiographical novel that named names, exposed corruption, and turned Stockholm's entire cultural establishment into characters in a merciless satire. The book sold, but it also enraged the powerful people it depicted. Strindberg's life fractured. He was ostracized, financially ruined, and pursued by lawsuits for libel. The Red Room was systematically erased from literary conversation, not lost to time, but actively suppressed by the very institutions it had attacked. His plays survived. This novel didn't. For over a century, English readers had no access to the work that defined Strindberg's entire vision: that Swedish society was a machine designed to destroy anyone with genuine ambition or integrity. Reading it now means understanding that modernism itself was born from rage against the mechanism, not from aesthetic experiment. If you've loved the savage social realism of Balzac, the institutional cruelty in Dostoevsky, or the cultural criticism woven through Ibsen's plays, then Strindberg's The Red Room is exactly what you've been looking for. The complete audiobook is at haberdashbooks.com. Subscribe and email hello@haberdashbooks.com with the subject Lost Library Pass to claim any full audiobook from our catalogue free. MP3 yours to keep. EPUB included when available. Refer a friend who subscribes and you both get another free audiobook. The link is in the description.
Chapter I. A bird's eye view of Stockholm. It was an evening in the beginning of May. The little garden on Moses Height, on the south side of the town, had not yet been thrown open to the public, and the flower beds were still unturned. The snowdrops had worked through the accumulations of last year's dead leaves, and were on the point of closing their short career and making room for the crocuses, which had found shelter under a barren pear tree. The elder was waiting for a southerly wind before bursting into bloom, but the tightly closed buds of the limes still offered cover for love-making to the chaffinches, busily employed in building their lichen-covered nests between trunk and branch. No human foot had trod the gravel paths since last winter's snow had melted, and the free and easy life of beasts and flowers was left undisturbed. The sparrows industriously collected all manner of rubbish and stowed it away under the tiles of the navigation school. They burdened themselves with scraps of the rocket cases of last autumn's fireworks, and picked the straw covers off the young trees, transplanted from the nursery in the deer park only a year ago. Nothing escaped them. They discovered shreds of muslin in the summer arbors. The splintered leg of a seat supplied them with tufts of hair left on the battlefield by dogs which had not been fighting there since Josephine's day. What a life it was! The sun was standing over the Liljeholm, throwing sheaves of rays towards the east. They pierced the columns of smoke of Bergsund, flashed across the Riddarfjord, climbed to the cross of the Riddarholms church, flung themselves on to the steep roof of the German church opposite, toyed with the bunting displayed by the boats on the pontoon bridge, sparkled in the windows of the chief custom house, illuminated the woods of the Lidding Island, and died away in a rosy cloud far, far away in the distance where the sea was. And from thence the wind came and travelled back by the same way over Vaxholm, past the fortress, past the custom house and along the Sickla Island, forcing its way in behind the Heastar home, glancing at the summer resorts. Then out again and on to the hospital Daniken. There it took fright and dashed away in a headlong career along the southern shore, noticed the smell of coal, tar, and fish oil, came dead against the city quay, rushed up to Moses Height, swept into the garden and buffeted against a wall. The wall was opened by a maidservant, who, at the very moment, was engaged in peeling off the paper pasted over the chinks of the double windows. A terrible smell of dripping, beer dregs, pine needles, and sawdust poured out and was carried away by the wind, while the maid stood breathing the fresh air through her nostrils. It plucked the cotton wool, strewn with barberry berries, tinsel, and rose leaves, from the space between the windows and danced it along the paths, joined by sparrows and chaffinches who saw here the solution of the greater part of their housing problem. Meanwhile, the maid continued her work at the double windows. In a few minutes the door leading from the restaurant stood open, and a man, well but plainly dressed, stepped out into the garden. There was nothing striking about his face beyond a slight expression of care and worry, which disappeared as soon as he had emerged from the stuffy room and caught sight of the wide horizon. He turned to the side from whence the wind came, opened his overcoat, and repeatedly drew a deep breath which seemed to relieve his heart and lungs. Then he began to stroll up and down the barrier, which separated the garden from the cliffs in the direction of the sea. Far below him lay the noisy, reawakening town. The steam cranes whirred in the harbor, the iron bars rattled in the iron weighing machine, the whistles of the lock keepers shrilled, the steamers at the pontoon bridge smoked, the omnibuses rumbled over the uneven paving stones. Noise and uproar in the fish market, sails and flags on the water outside. The screams of the seagulls, bugle calls from the dockyard, the turning out of the guard, the clattering of the wooden shoes of the workingmen, all this produced an impression of life and bustle, which seemed to rouse the young man's energy. His face assumed an expression of defiance, cheerfulness, and resolution, and as he leaned over the barrier and looked at the town below, he seemed to be watching an enemy. His nostrils expanded, his eyes flashed, and he raised his clenched fist as if he were challenging or threatening the poor town. The bells of St. Catherine's chimed 7, the splenetic treble of St. Mary's seconded, the basses of the great church and the German church joined in, and soon the air was vibrating with the sound made by the 7 bells of the town. Then one after the other relapsed into silence, until far away in the distance only the last one of them could be heard singing its peaceful evensong. It had a higher note, a purer tone, and a quicker tempo than the others. Yes, it had. He listened and wondered whence the sound came, for it seemed to stir up vague memories in him. All of a sudden his face relaxed, and his features expressed the misery of a forsaken child. And he was forsaken. His father and mother were lying in the churchyard of St. Clara's, from whence the bell could still be heard, and he was a child. He still believed in everything, truth and fairy tales alike. The bell of St. Clara's was silent, and the sound of footsteps on the gravel path roused him from his reverie. A short man with side whiskers came towards him from the veranda. He wore spectacles, apparently more for the sake of protecting his glances than his eyes, and his malicious mouth was generally twisted into a kindly, almost benevolent, expression. He was dressed in a neat overcoat with defective buttons, a somewhat battered hat, and trousers hoisted at half-mast. His walk indicated assurance as well as timidity. His whole appearance was so indefinite that it was impossible to guess at his age or social position. He might just as well have been an artisan as a government official. His age was anything between 29 and 45 years. He was obviously flattered to find himself in the company of the man whom he had come to meet, for he raised his bulging hat with unusual ceremony and smiled his kindliest smile. "I hope you haven't been waiting, Assessor." "Not for a second. It's only just struck 7. "Thank you for coming. I must confess that this meeting is of the greatest importance to me. I might almost say it concerns my whole future, Mr. Struve." "Bless me, do you mean it?" Mr. Struve blinked, He had come to drink a glass of toddy and was very little inclined for a serious conversation. He had his reasons for that. "We shall be more undisturbed if we have our toddy outside, if you don't mind," continued the assessor. Mr. Struve stroked his right whisker, put his hat carefully on his head, and thanked the assessor for his invitation, but he looked uneasy. "To begin with, I must ask you to drop the assessor," began the young man. "I've never been more than a regular assistant, and I cease to be even that from today. I'm Mr. Falk, nothing else." "What, Mr.?" Struve looked as if he had lost a distinguished friend, but he kept his temper. "You're a man with liberal tendencies." "Mr." Struve tried to explain himself, but Falk continued. "I asked you to meet me here in your character of contributor to the Liberal Red Cap. Good heavens, I'm such a very unimportant contributor. I've read your thundering articles on the working man's question, and all other questions which nearly concern us. We're in the year 3, in Roman figures, for it is now the 3rd year of the new Parliament, and soon our hopes will have become realities. I've read your excellent biographies of our leading politicians in The Peasant's Friend, the lives of those men of the people, who have at last been allowed to voice what oppressed them for so long. You're a man of progress, and I've a great respect for you." Struve, whose eyes had grown dull instead of kindling at the fervent words, seized with pleasure the proffered safety valve. "I must admit," he said eagerly, "that I'm immensely pleased to find myself appreciated by a young, and I must say a excellent man like you, assessor. But on the other hand, why talk of such grave, not to say sad things, when we're sitting here, in the lap of nature, on the first day of spring, while all the buds are bursting and the sun is pouring his warmth on the whole creation? Let's snap our fingers at care and drink our glass in peace. Excuse me, I believe I'm your senior, and I venture to propose, therefore." Falk, who like a flint had gone out in search of steel, realized that he had struck wood. He accepted the proposal without eagerness. And the new brothers sat side by side, and all they had to tell each other was the disappointment expressed in their faces. "I mentioned a little while ago," Falk resumed, "that I've broken today with my past life and thrown up my career as a government employee. I'll only add that I intend taking up literature." "Literature? Good heavens, why? Oh, but that is a pity." "It isn't, but I want you to tell me how to set about finding work." That's really difficult to say. The profession is crowded with so many people of all sorts, but you mustn't think of it. It really is a pity to spoil your career. The literary profession is a bad one." Struve looked sorry, but he could not hide a certain satisfaction at having met a friend in misfortune. "But tell me," he continued, "why are you throwing up a career which promises a man honors as well as influence? Honors to those who have usurped the power, and influence to the most unscrupulous. Stuff, it isn't really as bad as all that, isn't it? Well, then I must speak more plainly. I'll show you the inner working of one of the 6 departments for which I had put down. The first 5 I left at once for the very simple reason that there was no room for me. Whenever I went and asked whether there was anything for me to do, I was told no. And I never saw anybody doing anything. And that was in the busy departments, like the Committee on Brandy Distilleries, the Direct Taxation Office, and the Board of Administration of Employees' Pensions. But when I noticed the swarming crowd of officials, the idea struck me that the department which had to pay out all the salaries must surely be very busy indeed. I therefore put my name down for the Board of Payment of Employees' Salaries." "And did you go there?" asked Struve, beginning to feel interested. "Yes. I shall never forget the great impression made on me by my visit to this thoroughly well-organized department. I went there at 11 o'clock one morning because this is supposed to be the time when the offices open. In the waiting room, I found 2 young messengers sprawling on a table, on their stomachs, reading the Fatherland. The Fatherland? Struve, who had up to the present been feeding the sparrows with sugar, pricked up his ears. "Yes," I said, "good morning." A feeble wriggling of the gentlemen's backs indicated that they accepted my good morning without any decided displeasure. One of them even went to the length of...
That's chapter 1 of The Red Room, the novel that nearly destroyed Strindberg's life and was buried for over a century. Subscribe, claim your free Lost Library audiobook, and the complete audiobook is waiting at haberdashbooks.com.